Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy. Once again, I've got the privilege of hosting a business communication expert so that you and I can hear tips and strategies that we can apply to our business communication, and by doing so, boost our business. Thanks for being with us today on YouTube and on the podcast. It's my privilege today to welcome Diane DiResta, a certified speech professional who is founder and CEO of DiResta Communications Incorporated, a New York City consultancy serving business leaders who deliver high-stakes presentations, whether one-to-one in front of a crowd or from an electronic platform. Diane DiResta is the author of the book, Knockout Presentations: How to Deliver Your Message with Power, Punch, and Pizzazz. Hey, that's what we all want to do, isn't it? The book is an Amazon category bestseller. Diane has spoken on 4 continents. She has the unique ability to get the core of the message and translate complexity into simplicity. I applaud that. I've seen many people do the opposite, take the simple and make it complex. She's a former media trainer for the NBA and WNBA. She was featured on CNN and quoted in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, London Guardian, Investors Business Daily, and Bloomberg Radio. So you can tell we're very privileged to welcome Diane DiResta. Hello, Diane.
Hi, Bill. Thank you for having me.
It's a privilege and a pleasure. And looking over your bio, Diane, I noticed that you went through the education and the certification to become a speech pathologist. I happen to know a little bit about being a speech pathologist because one of my daughters has had a wonderful career as a speech pathologist. And certainly I know it takes intense education and training. So my first question naturally would be, you had the credentials, the qualifications for that profession. What is it that prompted you to switch to a different phase of communication and become a professional speaker, author, consultant, communication coach? What prompted that transition?
Well, I started in the school system, so I always thought I was going to be in speech pathology. But after 8 years, I still enjoyed working with the children, but I did not like the Board of Education as a career path, because the career path would have meant going to be an administrator. So I decided it was time to make a change. I had done a lot in 8 years. And so my first job out of the Board of Education was doing stand-up training. And I found my job through the New York Times. It was an entry level. It was standing up doing presentation training. So that was
you mean a classified ad in the New York Times? That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And it took me a while to do it because that transition was not easy. But that first job was my foray into business, which meant I was now training people in companies. And from there, I went on to be a trainer at Solomon Brothers. I was doing management training. And then I was assistant vice president at Drexel Burnham, where I recruited MBAs for the trading floor. So what I realized then was that I liked the pace, I liked what I was doing, I liked the money, but I did not like the culture of Wall Street. So I left, started freelancing with the intention of finding a training manager position. It took me 2 years, but in the interim, I was building this up and really enjoying it. And finally, someone offered me a job and I turned it down because I wasn't happy. I really liked what I was doing. So that's how I kind of backed in and fell into being in my own business. So that's how many years later, and I've never looked back. I've been through every recession and up and down, and I've never once looked back and said, oh, I wish I had a job. I'm very happy working for myself.
Well, you have a job, you just have a different boss now. And one of the things I say, I've been an entrepreneur since 1997, Diane. And people ask me what I like the most about my job. And I say, well, I shave my supervisor every morning.
Right, right. There's nothing like the freedom. And there's a downside to it as well, because during bad times, like when we had 9/11, people who had jobs were still getting their salary. I wasn't. So many of us got hit financially. So as an entrepreneur, you have to know how to ride the ups and downs. And what's helped me is cash reserves. So again, even during the tough times, I've never wanted to not do what I'm doing.
Well, and COVID also was a time when many
Yes,
people lost their corporate jobs. An
yes.
entrepreneur, if we were creative and if we learned how to make the adjustments we needed, for example, learning technology such as you and I might have learned Zoom then or
Hmm.
earlier. I want to get back for an instant to when you shifted from speech pathology and became a trainer. What was the content of your training?
The first job was presentation skills. And then it was management training. And then when I first started off, I was like a freelance. So I would do somebody's sales training, I would do somebody's outplacement. So it was like an extra pair of hands for hire. And then at a certain point, I said, well, I don't want to be a jack of all trades. I want to have my own expertise. So I started developing my own content. And now today, the three areas are presentations, interpersonal communication, and media training. And then along the way, I wrote a book called Knockout Presentations.
Well, I see in the upper corner of the screen when we're talking to you, I see that Knockout Presentations book cover.
Yes, that's actually a revised edition. We revised it in 2017. So it's a third edition and it's still selling. So I'm very proud of that.
I would imagine your book has the content of much of what you present in training.
Absolutely. So I wrote it as a seminar in a book. So it's the next best thing to having me there. So if you can't work with me personally, you can read the book, and it has checklists, do's and don'ts, templates, and everything from soup to nuts. And it's actually been used as a textbook in some colleges, and it's also been read in the C-suite. So it has a very wide breadth, and it's evergreen. So the skills don't go out of style.
You mentioned just now C-suite. You've worked a lot with CEOs, CIOs, CFOs, whatever initials we want to add for those in the C-suite. And as you've worked with them in many leading corporations, I'm sure there's some common deficiencies in communication that
Mhm.
you've come across. If you would please identify a couple of communication deficiencies which almost seem universal when you're dealing with CEOs, identify them, and then tell us how you would work with a CEO or CFO or CIO to move them forward and give them help along those lines. What would be some instances?
Well, one of the issues is clarity, meaning not being able to speak crisply. I had one CE, and especially when they're scientific or financial companies. So it's how do I get that complex material and speak in layman's terms? And that becomes a challenge. And I had one CEO who was getting ready to introduce a new member of the board, and he was giving her whole resume. And I said, you know what? They have it written down. Let's just give a couple of sentences as an introduction. We don't have to go through the whole thing. So it's that kind of mindset, telling them everything they need to know instead of everything that they need to know, rather
Well,
than
I think
everything
a
that you
good
know.
example, comparable there, Diane, would be my introduction of you today. There are, there's enough information about you that your biography, your accomplishments, your credentials, your clients, I could have gone on for 10 minutes, but people want to get, as you
Into the
put,
meat.
take complexity, make it simple, and also we want brevity, don't we?
Yes. And one of the other issues is style. So, for example, I had a newly promoted CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and he was ready for the job, but he didn't realize that he had to show up differently. So, what he was doing when he talked to the partners is he was reading all the numbers on the spreadsheet. So their eyes were rolling in their head, and I had to show him speak at a 30,000 foot level. They don't need those little numbers. They need you to tell the story of the numbers. So that's often an issue. I also had a newly appointed CEO of a spinoff company. And what happened there was her style was a little too effusive, and it didn't play well in the board room because now she was talking to the board of directors. So we showed her how to show up differently so she was more powerful. And one thing was, smile when you say hello, say good morning, but then don't be smiling the whole time. Get to the point, have a little bit more seriousness and gravitas. And it worked. Her boss told me 3 or 4 people at the end of the meeting came up and said that she did a 180 in her presentation. So sometimes you have very talented, smart people, but they're now at a new level and they need to show up differently. And that's where I come in.
And often it's even the phraseology that they use. Sometimes it's the jargon. They're so bogged down in their technical jargon.
Yes.
That slows the really getting a message across. Another factor that I've noticed along those lines would be giving some very imprecise information, answers to questions when people want details. I worked for one manager for a long time who, anytime we had a department meeting and somebody brought up a problem, he would say, "We're looking into that." Well, that doesn't tell you anything. Who's looking into it? When did they start? What's the target date? What do you expect as an outcome from this? So we also need to, while we stay away from jargon, we also need to teach some direct language and some simplicity, as you talk about, and being concise. Those are what you all pull together, aren't they?
Being concise is so key, and it's a challenge for so many people. But when you talked about being precise, I always tell people there's no power in generalities. So saying that we're looking into it is a generality.
Right.
The power is in specific language. So be specific. We're looking into it. Here's what we've done so far. Here's what we expect. We'll get back to you by this date. That gives people something to go on.
One of the factors I'm sure you run across, you and I as communication coaches constantly come across executives who even have moved up to very high levels who have still tremendous anxiety about giving presentations. And
yes,
you work with people, whether, as the introduction said, it's one-on-one, it's speaking to a small group, it's presenting on the media, on Zoom. What are a couple of your tips about this bugaboo of speech and anxiety, stage fright, we call it?
It's really interesting. That's the number one reason people come to me. It's the confidence factor. People are nervous about speaking. So here's what I tell people. If you're nervous, you're being self-centered because it's all about me, myself, and I. Oh, I hope I don't lose my train of thought. Oh, I hope I don't make a fool of myself. Get over yourself. It's not about you. It's about them, the audience. Put your focus where it belongs. What can you do to make them more comfortable? How can you say this clearly or simply so they understand? Focus has to be on the audience, not on you. When you're nervous, I know that you're in the future and you're imagining what can go wrong. So what you want to do is come back to the present moment. How do you do that? With the breath. So we do a lot with breathing because people have these out-of-body experiences and their heart starts racing. So let's start breathing and come back and feel the body and get centered and then focus on the listener. Now, there are a lot of other techniques. I have a whole chapter on that, but that is the core. It's mindset and then skill set. And I find that the more they have the skills and know how to recover, the better.
I can echo exactly what you're saying, because my advice is that when you're giving a presentation, you have 3 items that you could focus on. One is yourself, one is the message, and the third one is the audience. You want to focus on the audience and sharing your message with them. It's disastrous, it's self-destructive if you focus on yourself, because you can say, gee, here's somebody over here who it looks like they're texting, and one other person has their head down on the desk and another one has left the room. And next thing you know, your confidence is shattered. If you stay so centered on the message and getting that across to the audience, distractions are hardly even noticeable, right?
Yes, and I have a story about that. I was speaking to a group of scientists and I was asked to talk about the power of public speaking, whereas they tended to read word for word from their notes. And I was saying things that were unpopular, like, I can read as well as you can, and this is what you need to do instead. At one point, somebody opened up his laptop and started typing, and I thought, oh no, he hates it. And in that moment, I caught myself and I said, nope, I think he's taking notes on what I'm saying. Now, I don't know if that's what he was really doing, but I had the power in that moment to reframe what was happening. So again, that's why we start with mindset and then move on to skill set. So don't let anybody upset you because of what they're doing. If somebody is not smiling, it may be that they are really intense in their listening, and that means they're concentrating. I know someone who saw somebody walk out of their session and he said, oh, my first walking ovation. So if you can be light and not take things seriously, you're going to be so much more confident, so much more impactful.
And then one other point I know that you make, as I do, is forget about being perfect. It's just
Well,
that again is self-destructive. Let yourself make mistakes. I put it this way: sometimes you might put the emphasis on the wrong syllable.
You're so right, Bill. In fact, when I do trainings, when I do workshops, I will tell people I don't allow perfection in the room. And I do that for two reasons. One, you can't achieve it on earth, so why frustrate yourself? But two, nobody likes a perfect person. Think about it. They don't like it. They can't be that way, but they do like humans. So when you can show your humanity, that's what connects with an audience. And I've knocked over coffee that was behind me on a desk. I've knocked over flip charts. You just incorporate it. And if you don't get upset and you know how to recover, the audience won't either. I have a quick story. I was at the Ryman Theater in Nashville, and there were these two men who were singing. They were a duet. And at one point, one of them hit a bad note. His voice cracked. And I thought, oh, you know what that's like as the audience, what's going to happen here? He finished the number and then he turned to the audience and he said, I want to thank the audience for seeing me through puberty. Well, we just roared. It was so funny. That's a pro. So often, if you can anticipate your worst nightmare and plan a recovery strategy in advance, that will give you that insurance, that security you need to go on.
We've got to close in a minute, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with Karen Buxman. Mm-hmm. Karen calls herself a neurohumorist. She started her career as a nurse. And what you were saying about the Ryman Auditorium performer reminded me of something I read that Karen put on LinkedIn recently. She said that she was giving a presentation before a large audience, and she slipped and absolutely fell flat on the floor. And instantly she turned to the audience and says, and now I will take questions from the floor.
Perfect. Perfect. Perfect.
We must have some other interviews down the road because you are a grand resource, delightful to talk with, wonderful way of illustrating, as we said, taking the complex and making it simple and understandable. Diane, I know that there are people who will want to get in touch with you, so please give us your contact information.
You can contact me on my website, DiResta.com, DiResta.com. And if you're seeing this visually, you can see the spelling right on my Zoom panel. And we also have a group on Clubhouse. If you don't know what Clubhouse is, it's an audio app that you can download for free on your phone. And we meet every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. And the group is called Confidence, Clarity, Charisma. So visit me on DiResta.com. Feel free to link in with me. Love to talk with you.
Thank you. And I know that our YouTube viewers and our podcast listeners will want to contact you. And since you've given your contact information, I'm glad to give mine. Bill Lampton, the biz communication guy. So logically, my website is B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. I invite you to go there, check my services for corporations and leaders. Give me a call. Let's talk about your communication challenges and problems and how I can assist you with them. Diane, I want to give you the opportunity for a 20 to 30 second closing thought, please.
I would say this, that gifted speakers are born, but effective speakers are made. Anybody can be an effective speaker once you learn the skills. So go out there, read a book, go to YouTube, hire a coach, go take a class. Actually, I have a class on LinkedIn Learning called Speaking Confidently and Effectively. Do what you can, because this is one of the most critical skills for business and professional success. It is the most important. You cannot be without the ability to speak.
You can't get to the top and you can't stay at the top unless you are able to, no matter how great your ideas are, you must get them across clearly, confidently, and persuasively. Thank you again, Diane DiResta, and thanks to all of you who've been with us on the Biz Communication Show. Be with us again next week.
Thank you.